There you go.
I'm not seeing it in Clubhouse either, Taku, and that's what I sent out to people.
It's open now. Can you see it? There you go.
I'm not seeing it in Clubhouse.
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, now I see it. Okay, join room in progress.
Yeah. And you guys can join, but you don't have to. If you join, if there is an audio problem.
Well, it's going to be howling, so I'm gonna mute.
Yes, mute.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's the only thing. But you can hear me. Well, hear everybody on Zoom, so you don't have to. Actually, you don't have to open Clubhouse as well.
Okay, I'm going to close Clubhouse because I'm getting echoes.
Yeah, I think because I'm the only one who connected, and it's just everybody's listening to our conversations through my microphone on Clubhouse, and that's good enough for Clubhouse.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there are like 10 people, 12 people in Clubhouse, and 5 people here. So I think we can start right off. Are you guys ready? Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2. Welcome to YouTube and Clubhouse event hosted by me and the Zero Project. The guests are Yoshi Yamamoto and Mark Tchelistcheff, my dear friends, from Japan and from Russia? No, from United States. And the topic we'll talk about is Ukraine crisis, humanitarian crisis, war. Lots of ethical questions arose out of this mess Mr. Putin is making, and everybody's joining the bandwagon. So we're going to talk about what's the this heated wartime mentality, humanitarian crisis, weapons to citizens, war crimes, and the prospect of ceasefire, hopefully soon. And let me introduce Yoshi-san and Mark-san, a brief intro. Yoshi is has been working in the United Nations system for over 2 decades in humanitarian assistance in peacekeeping operations. He was in Kabul, Baghdad during those wars, in New York and many other places, in war-ridden places. His book Kabul Note was a national bestseller in Japan. And Mark Tchelistcheff is a filmmaker, producer, and documentary filmmakers and feature films and multimedia content creation. He's the founder of Open Films and best known for his best award-winning film, Andre, The Voice of Wine, narrated by Ralph Fiennes. So welcome, Yoshi and Mark. How are you doing?
Thank you very much.
Very good, very good. So, we want to talk about it's a dialogue on Ukraine, and we share our thoughts and ideas about the Ukraine crisis. So Yoshi-san, I want to start with you. What is your take on this whole thing?
What's my take? Okay. There are many issues. There are a couple of things I just want to share with you guys. Maybe we don't share completely the opinion, but the issues are sure I think we can share. One of the things we have to think about is immediate response to the human suffering on the ground. I don't think we have any different opinions. Something's happening either side. We have to do something. I've been working on the ground in the war zone. It's really beyond description. There is no good and bad. It's a total disaster if war happens. Well, that is one thing. We really have to think about it. The second point is to avoid increasing this human suffering. How to avoid it? Obviously, it's about ceasefire, truce, or armistice, whatever you call it. That's a secondary importance. We had to think about how to stop it. And the third point, which is related to the second point, what is the end game plan? Is there any end game plan for anybody? What do we want to do with this? There is an extreme opposite point of view. On the one side, maybe some people want to destroy Russia totally, which is a huge disaster. On the other side, other extreme point is that Russia completely occupy Ukraine, which is also totally disaster. With these two extreme points, there must be somewhere we have to settle down in the end. I don't see the positive view about this end game plan from anybody who are directly involved at the moment. I can see lots of scholars and journalists who started talking about how we should end, where we should be in the end. That's a little bit good sign of the discussion, but it's still a very small voice. The big voice dominates at the moment, which is very much enthusiastic, fanatic to support either side. There's no point of side with anybody at the moment. That is my worry at the moment. Maybe we can discuss about this later on with Mark and you guys.
Yes. Okay, Mark, what do you think? What is your take on the whole thing?
Well, first of all, I must say it's a great pleasure, even though we're thousands of kilometers, miles apart at this time, and over Zoom, to see you both. We both have spent good times together in our lives and been through a lot. And
where are you right now?
I'm in Berlin.
Berlin, yeah.
And in my own house, I have a Ukrainian mother with her 8-year-old daughter living with us, who have escaped Kiev. Her husband cannot obviously leave Kiev. And so we're also helping settle refugees at this point. And I think the first point in this discussion, I'm in total agreement with Yoshi. All wars are awful. All wars are evil. All wars bring suffering. And all wars, unfortunately, are helmed. The boats, the ships are helmed by people who have what, as Yoshi said in his, I guess, third point, that what their end games are, that we cannot really see because that's in their heads and we can't read their minds. However, in the middle are the people who are suffering. The suffering of those who are being bombed, the suffering of those who are refugees, and including the suffering of those who are speaking out in Russia and those who are not speaking out but living under certain conditions in Russia. Of course, at this point, I must say, suffering is something which is not just happening in Ukraine. There are bombs falling in other countries that people aren't talking about so much. As you know, in Syria and in Yemen and in Somalia and in many other places in the world, Afghanistan, and there is a great amount of suffering around the world that we should not forget about. Although we are focused on this present situation in Ukraine and this topic, it's and these points that Yoshi has brought up are extremely important. And what is the end game? Well, for me, the end game is to see the end of the suffering. Of course, how do we accomplish an end of suffering? And Yoshi and I may look at it, maybe we want the same end game, but we look at the, the road to this end game, the travel to the top of this mountain, a little differently. I, having Russian and German heritage, and having lived in Russia, and have a lot of contacts, and have been in contact with my Russian friends on both sides, and family on both sides of this idea of either pro-Russia, pro-Putin, and anti-Russia, anti-Putin, pro-Ukraine, and anti-Ukraine, so to speak. And it's a very difficult thing because it's also a personal thing for me. It's, I have personal friends who are involved and family that's involved. And just so it's clear, so it's not wishy-washy, I can stand, as you all know, even though I'm Russian and come from old Russian heritage, my wife has also relatives in Ukraine, and I have friends in Ukraine. I stand with Ukraine on this issue. Now, what does that mean? That we can get into a wider general discussion, what it means to say you stand with Ukraine and what you do in these, let's say, in your speech and your actions and your thoughts, and how you go about your ideas or your idealism, because I think all three of us here in this discussion are idealists. All three of us are humanitarians. Yoshi, you've worked so much in areas where conflict zones. I've been in conflict zones myself. I've seen also suffering of what certain conflict zones has brought upon people, and it's awful. I've been in conflict zones where I've been shuttling out refugees and being shot at, and this is, I probably would be there now, but I have now a 8-year-old, a 7 and 9-year-old daughters myself, and I have to look at what I can do best from my position, in my luxury of sitting in a comfortable seat with a roof over my head and no bombs yet falling on me. So we are all sitting from a luxurious standpoint by being in the places that we stand, and we can talk about this without being in the conflict zone. And it's that this is something which we shouldn't forget. We're all sitting behind our computers and going, and drinking our coffees or whatever else we have in our cups, and in a comfort zone. And we're talking about a place and a people at this point, including young Russian soldiers who were sent to a conflict zone, who probably, many of them, who don't want to be there and don't want to be shooting, maybe even on their own relatives. So there's suffering in every corner. There's suffering by the soldiers. There's suffering by those being killed. There is this suffering which hopefully somehow through humanitarian assistance, each one of us can do our best to help. And Yoshi, you were doing this for many, many years, dealing with not only the suffering during the conflict zones, but what to do with the suffering after conflict zones. For example, all of those mines being now put into the ground where later children will walk on and have their legs blown off, for example, or even any human, dogs, and you know this very well from demining, Yoshi. So, there are many complications. There's no black and white here. It's a very complex and a very difficult situation. And, but I stand in certain respects with how do we protect these poor people in Ukraine from the suffering. So we can get further into that. That was my
I think we should
long introduction.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I think it's all dark. There is no black and white. It's all black. It's all dark. It's all mess. And I'm worried about, the things are getting worse before it's getting better, and it's dire. And we've seen past 10 years the mess in Syria, how Syrian cities are destroyed and those refugees poured into Europe. And Mr. Putin loved it, because that destabilized the West, including Germany and many other countries. Because of the refugees crisis, the right wing rose in politics, and that's how Russia liked it. I see the same pattern here. The big refugees crisis, some 4 million people from Ukraine and probably more will be in neighboring countries and beyond. So Yoshi-san, from you're an expert in helping refugees and managing refugees crisis, humanitarian support. What do you think is the biggest problem right now, and what could be the possible solutions?
What do I think the biggest problem is?
Mm-hmm.
The operational difficulty is the same always. You work in the war zone, and your primary purpose is to help anybody who are suffering, regardless of which side those people are. You don't discriminate Ukrainian and the Russian. For us, everyone's the same. So that I wonder that is really understood by those people who are supporting from outside. I'm sure the people working on the ground really understand it. That's a primary principle of humanitarian assistance. But if you really excited to, or if you really get angry about somebody or against Putin, against Zelensky, if you have such emotions, your action might be distorted. That is very, very dangerous.
That's true.
You, in front of you, two injured soldiers. One is a Russian, one is a Ukrainian. You don't discriminate anybody for such cases. You really have to support either soldiers. That's the situation always. So in the war zone, the hospital, we had to make a temporary hospital always. And we take care of both soldiers combating each other. That's a real situation. But when I watch the media, it's really dangerous. As if there are bad people and good people on the ground.
Yeah.
You really cannot say anymore. And they're talking about war crime. There is no war without war crime. Every single war is full of war crimes. You cannot, side with somebody who has no war crime, very good intentioned people, others who have a bad intention people. You cannot make such a separation. But it's very difficult at the moment. If you say something a little bit about neutral, you will be regarded as a pro-Putin.
I know.
That's a ridiculous situation.
Exactly. I've seen lots of discussions in US, in Japan. Mostly those two countries are specialized in gathering information and making a TV show about. But I think maybe we should talk about this. With people jumping on the bandwagon of accusing Putin, accusing Russians, and everything Russian is banned. Being banned. Seems like in the United States. That's the wartime mentality. We've seen it during the World War II. Every Japanese citizen were captured and sent to prisons. I'm fearing same kind of heated mentality is happening. Russian culture is being banned. No vodka, no ballerina, no opera singer from Russia can perform unless they pledged allegiance to the West.
That's really extreme.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with war.
Well, just respond. Last Saturday night, we had an impromptu call from a dear friend who is a Russian opera singer, and she came over for dinner with her daughter, who's beginning of a teenager, 13. Her husband is German and is a conductor of opera. And so they're both very much involved in the arts. She has concerns because she's also doing a concert for humanitarian aid for Ukrainian refugees, which means then she is, according to the Russian government, anti-Putin. Her father, who's 82, is still in St. Petersburg. She was very distraught, very upset. I know many Russians are. And so this is the other side of, the suffering from the Russian point of view. If you're a Russian, there's many Russians, of course, who support it. But her father, who never joined the Communist Party, she told me, and is completely, she's worried if she goes back, will the borders close? Will she not be able to get out? I mean, these are also the facts that are facing a present regime in Russia. I have friends who have fled Russia. I have friends who have stayed in Russia. I have journalists who who've left Russia now because they were worried that by using the word war, or even the word, what you said, war crimes, it's illegal. You can go to prison for 15 years in Russia for just saying war crimes, if you write about it. Now, so yeah, I also look at the freedom of the state of when you talk about press. I think the first sensational press was CNN covering the first Iraq war. That was the first time war was live on television in people's homes. Before that, it wasn't. There was newsreels, but it wasn't live reporting so much from a war zone. We have sensationalism by all sides of the press, by the sides that are in the United States, the right, the left, the middle. We have, of course, the sides in Russia that are underground now because they have to be, and the sides that are the pro under the Russian regime. Now, I lived in Russia until 2014 and left August 7th, 2014, because there was an anti-Americanness, which had been developing since the mid-2000s with Russian propaganda against Americans, to tell you the truth. And the Russian propaganda machine was already taking over all of the propaganda, including the publishing of books for children and everything. That all at one point was free, and then it all became
really
under the Russian government. So the Russian government controls that press. We are lucky. We're here. We can discuss this. We can say war crimes. We can say war, no war. We can say whatever the Russians want to say, denazification, and we won't go to jail for it here in the West. But if you go to Russia and you start speaking out, you might go to jail for this. They might come knocking on your door and you might disappear for a little while. So we're again coming, I feel, from a very luxurious, privileged place by being able to speak what we want to say.
Yeah, compared to your friends in Russia and other places. But I remember the time.
And going back to the refugee crisis, which you mentioned, and you also mentioned Syria. Now, of course, I don't know if a lot of people understand the bombing, for example, of cities of Aleppo. That was done not by the Syrians, but by the Russians.
Right.
They destroyed that beautiful city. They basically completely annihilated it. Of course, we also, not we, but the American government, other governments, the Saudi Arabian government, annihilated cities in Iraq, they annihilated cities in Yemen. I mean, this is annihilated cities in past wars in Vietnam, in Korea, etc. So this is more, as you said, war itself is a crime, I find.
But it has
But
become.
My last point in this,
Yeah, go ahead.
Taku. I also have been having discussions with some very old friends of mine that, and in some ways way back related in my 500 years to my relations in Germany, about, there's the comparison of Putin to Hitler, Putler, and, March 15th, 1939, when the German government marched into Sudetenland saying the Czechoslovakian government had been killing and creating massive genocide against the Germans of Czechoslovakia, which was totally a lie. The same lies are being propagated by the Kremlin. But in this stance, when I spoke to my German, who happens to be a lawyer, he is saying it's a very complex issue, like you, Yoshi. You cannot just be on one side, blah, blah, blah. And I look at him and I say, also, I have to take sometimes a side. I cannot be complacent. My own family has been refugees. We've been refugees in a way since the Russian war, since the Russian Civil War. And our family fled in 1921. And then we fled to Turkey. And then we were some of us were and then there was a war in Bulgaria and, against the Bulgarian king, which my family fought to keep him installed. But then, anyway, there's a lot of history. Then I was myself during the war, in ex-Yugoslavia and bringing out refugees to Hungary during that time in the early 90s. So for me, I cannot be as complacent. My own great uncle, Vladimir Lindenberg Tchelistcheff, was a doctor in a hospital in Berlin in the 1930s. He was told by the government that he could not treat certain people. He stood against it. He was vocal against it, and they sent him to a camp. He survived. But those who didn't and just were complacent, many people came to his aid and were vocal in trying to save him. And that's what saved his life. They finally got him out. But complacency is also, I find, a problem. I find complacency when you do not stand up for the rights of people, for the rights of those who are suffering being inflicted on. And yes, if I was standing there and there was a Russian soldier and a Ukrainian soldier, I would help them both. To me, they're both human beings and I would help them both. But in the stand for myself against something which I feel is being perpetrated upon a people, where indiscriminate wars have this, indiscriminate bombing. These people did not ask for this. The average Russian that I know of didn't ask to be part of a war and invade a sovereign country of Ukraine, which actually signed an agreement in Budapest in 1994 and gave up their nuclear weapons so that Russia would never invade. And Russia signed this agreement. So that's all politics, that's history. But what's happening on the ground is something else. Women, children, men, old men, all kinds of people are being massacred and murdered at this point. I call it murder because I feel it is murder. It's like anybody else, just shooting them on the street. There's cars fleeing and they're being shot at. There was a man who survived in Kharkiv, who survived in the Nazi concentration camps, only in his 90s to be killed by a bomb sent by the Russian war machine. So I understand your point of view, Yoshi. The humanitarian aid, the United Nations must stand for all nations, and we must look at it in a neutral way. But I cannot and will not go against my conscience and not speak out. And I've been trolled already now for speaking out against this war, speaking out against these atrocities by Russians, saying that I am a tart, I am unpatriotic. How can you lived in Russia, Russia gave you so much, your family, why are you speaking out? You're awful. So I'm getting it on both sides. And I will take it. I will do my best to bring my point of view across, but I will not stand in the middle of complacency and say, this is okay. No war is okay. I was against the war in Iraq. I was against the war in Afghanistan. I was against the war in Syria. No war is okay. Anyway, sorry. Emotional.
I know. Yoshi-san, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what's your identity? I know you're American legally, but you have also Russian descendants element. So you might be a divided identity by yourself. But
I am a confused soul, Yoshi. I was born.
I can see that.
Thank you, my dear friend. I was born in a Muslim country. My first language was Pushtu, because we had Pushtu people in our house helping take care of me, because I was born in Pakistan.
Yeah.
My first other language, of course, I had English and Russian in the house. My next language was Hebrew. So, my parents were very liberal, and they sent me to a Jewish kindergarten in Herzliya Patua. And we lived there, we came there after the war, of 67 war, and I used to collect bullet shells in the desert around our house. At that point, there was nothing. Now it's a huge, beautiful city. I remember once driving with my mother, and she was showing Sir Max, who we called Uncle Max. He was visiting my father from England. And my mother took a wrong turn and drove to the border. and they started shooting over our little Volvo. God. And I was sitting in the back seat facing backwards. So, and then, my first, let's say, major spiritual experience was in Kenya. I was 6 years old with a Maasai. So I've had a very, let's say, wide spiritual experience later on in Japan, also as a 7-year-old, and in Indonesia, living in Thailand. I consider Earth my home. When you look at Earth from space, you don't see borders. I hate false patriotism. I think all patriotism is false. When we start waving flags, we are all 99.9% the same genetically. There's a minor percent which changes how our eyes are, how our skin color is, but we are all of the human race, and we have one spaceship right now that we know of that can contain our human race and also this world of sentient beings, of animals, and the beauty in this world. And we can destroy it so quickly. We are destroying it anyway, but with the nuclear weapons and with everything else, it can be destroyed so quickly. So when you say, where am I from, Yoshi? I'm from Earth. I'm a human being. I'm part of the human race. I have Russian heritage. I have German heritage. I grew up in many countries. When I was in growing up in Asia, of course, I was the white man in Asia. When I came to America, I felt like I was from Thailand. So, because I was there, but I was white on the outside, but I felt Thai in Asian on the inside.
Okay, Mark. What I meant is, I confirmed you are from the Earth, not from America, not from Russia. I don't mean to offend you. I don't mean to hurt your emotion. Yeah. But you're talking about anti-American. To be anti-American, you don't need any propaganda. if you have any kind of a knowledge of America, what America has been doing, you naturally would be an anti-American. This is a very provocative statement, but I have seen this everywhere in the world, in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, wherever I go. I have seen people who develop their anti-American feeling. You know why? The reason is exactly what you're talking about, the complacency of America. America is the most complacent, self-complacent country. I'm not supporting what Putin did. It's a horrible act, violate sovereign countries, right? But what America has been doing all the time, it's been doing for the past 80 years. So if America said the same thing, like Indian people who are against Putin, it has no weight. What America did for the Iraq is terrible. I was in the middle of Baghdad. America said without any UN authorization, they attack because they have to do a preemptive self-defense. What does it mean? That's a ridiculous concept.
Exactly.
Preemptive self-defense, nobody attacked America, but America attacked to protect America. So I developed really, huge anger against America at that time when I was Baghdad. But again, for my professional job, I have to work with American soldiers. I meet Americans every day. And I'm not against each individual American. They are always good guys. They are professional, and we have to work together. The purpose is to alleviate human sufferings, right? So I had to push down my emotion to be a professional. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not really, I don't think I'm in a place which is so different from what you are, but I think it's a matter of expressions. I don't know how far you are from me, but more or less in the same place.
Well, I think war always, especially this war, present the existential question. And I wanted to ask you these two fundamental questions. One is like in the presence of evil, like war, like Putin, like American bombing innocent people in Afghanistan, in Baghdad and elsewhere. In the presence of evil, can you be neutral? Can you really be neutral? That's one question. The other question I've been having with my Ukrainian friend, Bogdan, become my good friend, and we had a series of conversations. And when Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, gave weapons to the citizens in the wake of the war, wake of invasion, I thought that was terrible. The president's job is to protect people, not to let them be the soldier and fight and be killed. With AK-47, it's like giving takeyari, the bamboo, for the citizens in Japan. That's what I saw. So don't do that, because they become not the civilians, but they're the soldiers now. So they can kill you, or they can massively attack you. And there's no war crime for them, for Russians, because you have weapons. Weaponized citizens are soldiers. So I thought it was terrible, but Bogdan explained to me there is no choice. He has guns. Many people have guns. They're ready to fight and die for their countries. And Mr. Zelensky was brilliant in promoting war and turned everybody into soldiers. And the existing question I wanted to ask you is like, in what condition are you willing to kill as an individual? They say, I will kill for my country. I will kill for my family. And that this kind of question always arises. And also there is always question, even in Japan, that, hey, we have to protect and we have to have more weapons because of that kind of question. If you are invaded and your family is in danger of being killed, do you take the gun and kill the other soldiers? Those are the two existential questions I'm thinking about every day. So what do you think?
Well, maybe I hope you don't have them in your dreams, because that's hard thoughts to have, my dear Taku. I can understand, because I am dealing with refugees every day whose husbands, fathers, brothers are in Ukraine. They cannot leave the country. Now, whether that's wrong or right, I don't know. But I can also understand that they want to defend their homes. They want to defend their families. They want to defend the places that they fought for to have. Obviously, the history in 2013 and 14 with the Maidan revolts. The Ukrainian people fought for an idealism to have a freedom, and that's what this existential question is also the exact existential question of what is freedom, what is your right as a person, and I can honestly say that freedom is taken away under those areas that are under control of Russia. Now, when you talk about soldiers, I also do know that there are a lot of foreign fighters that are from Chechnya and other places that are doing the dirty work, because many Russian soldiers do not want to fight against their own people in a way. They have their own relatives. So there's a lot of dirty work happening now in Russia. A lot of, war crimes, probably on both sides. But, it's the aggressor. There was no war in the Donbass regions before 2014. Putin installed these people just like he installed, because I was filming in Crimea right before that, and I have many friends in Crimea. At first, they were telling me, and when this was happening, the green soldiers are here, we're totally against it. But those that kept up the voice of being totally against it had their basically heads cut off. They couldn't get jobs, they lost their jobs, they couldn't survive. And then the others were basically forced to be quiet and then support the regime by not saying nothing. But that doesn't mean they support the regime. It means they're just trying to survive and keep their families alive and feed their children. Now, with these soldiers, I think that, would you go out as that famous picture in Tiananmen Square and stand in front of a tank and be run over for the idealism and the right idea, let's say, of whatever freedom is? Now, of course, that's a different situation. Here we have an invading country. We have a country that is invading another country, a sovereign state. And I think Putin made a drastic and crucial mistake of misjudgment, thinking that, as in the areas of Lugansk and Donetsk, that the population would fold, that maybe, just like what happened when the Americans ridiculously, in some crazy, stupid time frame, left Afghanistan and left a vacuum, and the president flew out thinking that Zelensky would flee. Zelensky didn't flee. He happens also to be of Jewish descent, whose ancestors were killed by the Nazis and held in concentration camps for being Jewish, although that's called denazification by Putin's propaganda machine. And you look at the Tchelistcheff brothers, the mayor of Kiev, they're Jewish. So, of course, every country has different factions. You have the middle, you have the left, and you have the very right, and you have the Nazis in America, in Germany, and in Ukraine. Everywhere in the world, you have, extremes of both sides. Of course, the propaganda machines use the very extremes for their saying that this is what's happening. But if I were in that position and I was in Ukraine and people were attacking my home and my family, and I'm an emotional human being, I'm an artist. I'm maybe not as rational as you are, Yoshi, or as a good lawyer, or as some of my friends who are judges and they want to see everything, from this kind of ego's point of view, where, I might pick up the gun to defend my place. But right now, what is my place in the world? The earth is, I'm here to defend the earth. And there's a crime against earth happening now. It's a crime against the world. All wars are crime against the world. We have because this crisis is a global crisis. Ukraine has been the breadbasket for the world. Due to this war, so many in Africa are going to be suffering because they won't have food.
That's right.
There's food supplies. I mean, there's so many other ramifications from this one war. All wars have ramifications, but this war has a multitude of ramifications. And so to me, I don't know if it's an existential question, whether I would fight or not. It's more of a moral question at that point. If the bomb started falling on me, I mean, I also have to remember, I can get in my tiny little old, 22-year-old car and putt towards the border. And in 8 hours, I might have a bomb land on me. 8 hours from where I am standing, in 8 hours by driving, I can have a bomb land on me at the border of Ukraine. If I drive normally, in 14, 15 hours, I'm in Kiev. I'm not sitting 1,000 miles away. I have to remember that, what if there's a misfire of a missile, which can happen in war? You know that, Yoshi. War is messy. War is criminal, and missiles get misfired. They get sent to wrong areas. What are the other ramifications of this war? What is the end game? What if a missile lands in a NATO country? Then what happens? Then you have a problem of a dictator who has his finger on a nuclear weapons, and he's already been saying that, he's not afraid to push the button. NATO is in a very weird position also. So, and your existential question of being Japanese and saying, well, we need to build up an army so we are not attacked. Well, I look at the Budapest Accords, which you know about, Yoshi. Ukrainians gave up all their major weapons so they wouldn't be attacked, and now they're being attacked by the country that said they wouldn't be attacked by for giving up their weapons. If they had those weapons, would they be attacked? Maybe still. But again, so what's your answer to that, Yoshi? I mean, not your answer, but there is no answer here, because I think it's all probing questions from a luxurious situation where I'm 8 hours away from the border and you're, but still, if Putin decides to push a button, New York probably would be one of the first places it hits.
But my answer is that if America didn't support militarily Ukraine, this didn't happen.
Mm.
And from 2017 December, Trump started arming and training military officers in Ukraine.
Yes.
That's a huge signal to the surrounding countries, let alone Russia, anybody. But anyway, so Tak, what's your first question?
In the presence of pure evil, well,
Evil.
it's not just because the reason I'm asking that first question is that there is labeling of evil, and we're good people. Like America is good, good country, or NATO is good, Putin is bad. And there is no neutrality. Just like Bush, when declared the war in Iraq, Baghdad, are you with me or you are evil? That kind
I was
of
evil because I was against it.
yeah, because that kind of labeling is going on, and of course, I want to stand with Ukraine, but that's got to be used with that propaganda machine of hey, good and evil. You should be on the right side of the history. That's another way of saying good and evil. But in reality, if there's a pure evil like war, there is no side, and you cannot take a neutral position. You have to sometimes fight against it or run from it or accuse what's evil. So that's one question. The other question, simple question, is are you willing to take gun or any weapon willing to kill the enemy?
Okay, so first question, I abandoned the idea that there are evil people and there are non-evil people long ago. There is no such people who are evil, who are not evil. People become evil. That's my conclusion. So anybody, you or Mark, or anybody can be evil. And anybody can be a very good person. That's after I have seen all this atrocity in Afghanistan, Somalia, and Baghdad, everywhere. That's my conclusion. So human can be very evil. Human can be very good. And that relates to second question, when you kill other people. I think I can kill other people to protect myself, not to be killed, or maybe protect a very close friend or family. That point, I become evil. So I don't trust myself. I'm a very good person. I can be evil. That's where I am at this age. Maybe I will change sometime later. So that's the two questions, right?
Yeah, I had to ask that question as last weekend. I had that discussion with interfaith people. They're praying for peace, and I was invited to just as a listener, but in the panel discussions, that question arose, and one of I think he's Hindu religious leader. There is Buddhist, Christianity, Islam. They discussed about evil. They discussed about peace. They discussed about ancient war, and of course, this Hindu priest quoted Gandhi, the nonviolence protest. Which doesn't mean you don't protest. You protest by all power, but without violence, and that is spiritually higher, and that will eventually win the war by demoralizing the other part. And that's in large part after hundreds of thousands people got killed. After that, Gandhi's idea won over India. So that was a good example he gave me. But still, I'm kind of shaken. I used to think I would never pick up my gun. I used to think that I am a person that I'm willing to get killed rather than kill other people. That's what I was thinking before. That was my belief in a way. But now it's shaken, because my friend, lots of friends in Ukraine, they never touched a gun before, and they start the same way before, like a month ago. But now they have gun in his hand or in her hands, and now they are asking that question every day: Do I shoot this weapon? So my belief or my thinking is shaken. I may become a killer in that kind of situation. So I think that's and of course every person in Ukraine is put into that position. Do you want to flee?
Yeah,
Fight?
I understand what you're trying to say. I used to be perhaps in the same position. I feel inclined not to kill anybody. For me, it's fascinating to pursue the non-violent philosophy. All this is great. But when I started looking at war actually on the ground, gradually I started changing my mind. In front of you, let's say 3-year-old boy is about to be killed. Can you say, I believe non-violent philosophy? I really cannot say that. I try to stop it. That's what I have find in my mind. So that's one thing. At the same time, on the other hand, I started loathing, I started hating the idea of killing people for the idea, for the ideology, for the any kind of philosophy.
Right.
It's very, very dangerous to kill for the sake of your country, for whatever ideology, for capitalism, socialism, communism, liberalism. Don't kill anybody for the idea. That's a ridiculous notion. So that's the two, opposite directions. I started developing my own feeling. That's where I am at the moment. Maybe I'm changing every day, but after 15 years of the war I've been living with, that's where I am at the moment.
Yoshi, to your point, I mean, this is where I call that the false patriotism, where people fight for these ideas and the philosophies, as you say, and this is very dangerous. And the ideas of borders are very dangerous. Obviously, there's so much in history written about the use of the masses in convincing the masses to do things with these ideas. And this is also where the press is twisted around in seeing only one point of view. As we said, I have this opera singer, I have friends who are ballet dancers who are Russian, and they are feeling the pressure. They shouldn't feel the pressure because they're just artists. And they just happen to have been born as a Russian. My own wife is Russian. She's against this. She stands with Ukraine, so to speak. But I'm evil too, I would say, I would pick up that gun if I was forced to. When you make an example, and there's a 3-year-old child, and there's a sniper, and that sniper, I think, is going to shoot that 3-year-old child, and I see the sniper. Would I stop the sniper from shooting the 3-year-old child the best I could? Or would I put my body in front of the child and die for it? Now, if you're in ever a situation, which I hope none of us are, but right now, many in Ukraine are, where your homes are being attacked, where your families are being attacked, it's not anymore an existential question in the luxury behind our screens and cameras, it's a real question. Do I protect my family? Is that evil? Or is that doing something righteous? Now, you called it evil, and I don't know if I can call protecting your family evil. If you're protecting your family, you're not protecting an idea. You're not protecting a philosophy. You're protecting your family.
Oh, your own life. Is it evil?
And your own life.
Mhm.
Is that evil to protect your own life? If someone is, I remember, again, but if we go back to like my training as a Buddhist in the Himalayas, and I look at, certain, of course, you go back, it's all blah, 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 talk and dogma ideology, but there's some goodness in the idea of having compassion and wisdom, having the compassion of all others and being tolerant of others. Well, don't we need a lot more of that? But compassion by itself is often compared to as strong legs. And if you're walking in a desert with strong legs, you don't know if you're going to walk into a cactus. You don't know, it'll just walk because it's strong. Compassion is full of energy. So you need the wisdom, you need the eyes to see so you can guide the legs in the right direction. So you need always this both, this compassion and this wisdom. And with compassion and wisdom, hopefully you're guided in your mind in the right direction. But we are also survivors. You look at not all of those who were in the concentration camp were good people. Some were good people to begin with, so to speak, whatever good person means. But in order to survive, they colluded with the camp masters. They did things awful to their own people. What do you do? Who rises up in their moral, whatever you want to call that, moral idealistic sense in the worst situation? Who fights for the rights of those people? You look at all of those people who were hiding during, for example, the Nazi period, hiding Jewish families in their homes. And they knew if they would get caught, they would probably also get killed and go to the concentration camp. So, but they were morally right. If you look at politics, you look at Germany we were the cause of the Syrian war, the West. Merkel did the right thing, opened the borders. She didn't have any infrastructure. They didn't have any idea of how to deal with the people. They didn't have any vetting system because there were also bad people coming through. But morally, it was right. So where do you stand? Again, what is moral, and what is right, what is wrong? But where do you stand in a sense of your own being, of what is? I know that I can, if I'm pushed to a point, I probably can be very evil. I think every human being, and that's the nature of being a human being, I think, is that we have the capacity to have all levels within us. But what is the balance? How do we bring in the compassion, and how do we bring in the wisdom to make the right choices? And where do we stand? So we are not, yes, complacency, Yoshi, America's been complacent. Many countries have been complacent. Well, I can point my finger to so many countries around the world that are complacent, and generalizations, populations, for doing nothing at a time when they should be shouting out. But within the populations, there's always those who fight for the right, and they get killed for it. Martin Luther King was one of them. Gandhi was another one of them. I mean, we have good examples in history of those who stand in the right side of history, or because history is only judged by us, the victors who write it, History is being written differently in Russia right now. I know that. History, and present day, even the history of a week ago, is totally different from what the Russian news is showing than what we are seeing. So, in this sense, for these reasons, I stand with this idea of standing with Ukraine, meaning I'm helping as much as I can those who are suffering. At this point, I can't go fight. It would be wrong for my family. But I can help the refugees, and that's what I'm doing my best with, in the small way that I can, to alleviate their suffering, to alleviate their situation, to help them navigate a very uncertain time in their lives. Because, they want to go back to their homes. All of them want to go back. But some of them don't have homes to go back. I'm listening to conversations of the telephone calls between the refugees and their home. Is your house bombed? Is your apartment still there? Your family was killed. Oh, that house was burned. That house was bombed. Those children are killed. I mean, this should not be happening. We're in 2022. But yet humans have this ability of evil and good in them. And, I'm sure Putin loves his dogs and gives them love. And they would never think that this man who feeds them and cares for them would send such evil upon another country. Stalin was loved by, I'm sure, his dogs too, and Hitler by his.
I know.
So, I mean, we all have a capacity of both in us, I think of all emotions, of the jealousy, of the anger. It's about how do we balance that? How do we react to it, and what do we do with it? And I can't be complacent in this position. I wasn't complacent in the wars. I spoke out against the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. As you know, our dear friend Kenji spoke out against and was helping the children in these areas and was killed for it by ISIS and his head cut off. And that still affects me. And I think of the horrific stories of my own family who are running away from the Bolsheviks, who are cutting our heads off. They murdered, when I speak of dogs, they murdered 500 of our dogs in our estate. We were wealthy, of course, and the dogs had nothing to do with war, nothing to do with our evil. We just raised them, but they killed them as a symbolism. And again, going back to that, Yoshi, that symbolism, fighting for some ideal, a symbolism that is created is wrong. Waving this American flag, waving any flag in a way is wrong, because again, it creates division. It means I am different from you. And this is what's happened in polarization, in politics, in the world. And you see it so clearly in America. You see it also in almost every other country now, the polarization. And that's what these people who exist for their power, they want the polarization because it gives them the power. We give them the power. Anyway, my soapbox, wash my hands now from it. And Yoshi, so you too probably, as you said, would pick up a gun if you had to.
I think Taku's question's point is that there is a one and the same thing which has both evil and evil aspects and right aspects. But protecting your own family is not evil. That's the right thing to do. But at the same time, killing other people is not right thing.
Right.
So you cannot solve this dilemma. If you think about soldiers who try to kill you or kill your kids, this soldier has no idea what he's trying to do. He was ordered by somebody, and he has no choice but to kill you. But from your point of view, you have to protect yourself and your own kids. So that's a fundamental dilemma. That's why I think Tak, you question when people can kill or can or should or supposed to kill other people. I don't know the right answer. There is a right answer.
There is no right answer, yeah, but it keeps you thinking. And I would, yeah, listening to you guys, I feel like I don't want to kill anyone or any under any circumstances, but my family, you know, if my family is in danger, I would probably kill. That's how I'm feeling today. I may change tomorrow. And that's the kind of mentality we're putting into, you know. Of course, people under fire, being asked and being hold the gun for your country, for your freedom, and this is the mentality that you're kind of forced into when this big war, big evil, is unfolding in big country. And you know, as a journalist and as a human being, I think I always remember Kenji. You know, Mark, you mentioned about Kenji Goto, you know, who got killed in Syria, got taken hostage by ISIS. He always listened to the weakest, the smallest voices, you know, refugees, children, women, the sick, and he became the voice of them. And so he was a journalist and video maker, but he was also a humanitarian person to really listen to when evil happens, who suffers the most, the weakest, and be with them and be their voice. So I always remember that aspect of life and hopefully be that, you know, regardless of how horrible situation could be. And I'm actually, in fact, I have to report, make TV shows about this whole situation, analyze, interview. But sometimes just listening to experts becomes just a bird's eye view of what the geopolitics plays out, what's in the game, and remote from what's happening on the ground, what's happening on these children and women, refugees. So that's what I'm always reminding myself. Remember these people on the ground.
It's difficult. I mean, but it comes back. I want to come back to that original statements or in a way your question, Yoshi. What do you see as a solution? I mean, how you stop this war? How do you help stop the suffering of this war? How do we, I mean, we as individuals, I mean, I don't know what I can do. I can just help a few people. I'm not a politician. Even if I go to Ukraine and pick up a gun and shoot and then get killed, does that solve anything? If I even kill a Russian soldier, or they kill me first, will that solve anything? Probably not. Will it change anything? Probably not. But what can we do then if we're against war, against whatever you want to call this evil, against these actions? What do those do who care, who do not want to wave a flag, who do not, you know, who feel trapped because of not wanting to wave any flag? What do they do? What can we do as individuals within our society, within our groups, within our friends to help? I ask you both.
What do you think, Tak?
Sorry.
Well, I think, you know, waving flag, I'm always against it. You know, I don't want to be under any flag, but help people to understand. But well, in any situation, you know, the war is the biggest problem, but the discrimination happens in every society, and you are forced to take sides. you're forced to discriminate against somebody else. That's the problem for us. And I've been, in United States since 1988, now 35 years, and I make documentaries about atrocity committed by U.S. abroad and domestic discrimination and killing and the racism in the United States. That's my main subject of understanding of the United States. So I totally get what you're saying, Yoshi-san. We were very angry when Baghdad started to being bombed, and Afghanistan, 2001, soon after 9/11, with no reason they started to bomb Afghanistan. And people cheered, and I was kind of cheering because we are so upset about 9/11. Few thousand people got killed in front of us. So that makes you upset and be in support of somebody, be in support of violence. So that we went through that, and I think we are going through that. And I think there are ways to get away from it. Don't take sides of violence, but take sides of humanitarian support.
Obviously, during the Vietnam War, you had those who went to Canada and who were doing war resistance who were drafted. There are things each individual has to make a decision for themselves what to do. There are those who are conscientious resistors who were in the military and said, I will not pick up a gun, but I will be a medic. But of course, they're still supporting, in a way, a war effort because they're supporting one side of helping these soldiers who are being shot, but they would not pick up a gun. Now, these are questions which are very difficult. I mean, and it comes back again. I ask a simple question. Those who do not want to wave flags, but do not want to see this war, what do they do?
I know.
That was my question, Yoshi. What do they do? Taku, what do they do?
If you leave some emotions aside, but definitely we have to have somebody between fighting parties. Those two parties may want to finish this war, but they cannot easily, So usually there are a group of people or one individual who try to be in between two combating parties. The problem is America is a part of the war. Europe, Western Europe is a part of the war. So two big political, forces are out of question now. Then naturally we had to find somebody else outside. At the moment, maybe the biggest force is Chinese people, China. Or maybe China and some other people or countries helping China. We had to find some other force in these situations. I watched the American Senate's hearing on Ukraine. They are fighting war. They are not third party anymore. They are in the middle of a war. So we cannot expect American at all to be a third party mediator. So that's a difficult situation. That we have to find somebody, most likely China and other group of countries, and then they have to listen to both sides, what they want, because they cannot do their faces. They cannot say, oh, we lost. Either side. We have to find a way out for both of them. Okay, that's enough. We stop war.
Yeah.
Both of them have to say that. If one of them them win, there is no end of the game.
Right.
There is no win or lose situation. We have to let both of them win.
Mm, mm,
Usually the third party will find it,
mm.
but we don't have a third party. That's a
You didn't,
problem.
you didn't mention.
You mentioned,
Yeah, go
may
ahead.
I intercede? I don't think China can be a third party, to tell you the truth, because they have also too many of their own, they have their own agenda. And of course, one of their agenda is their own idea of dominance in the South China Sea and of what they call part of China, but Taiwan doesn't consider it part of China. They consider themselves a democratic republic on their own. So I don't think China can be I hate to say it, I don't think they can be an impartial mediator. They have there's too many geopolitical games together with China at this point. So who can be a mediator? Who can come in here and mediate between these two countries? Generally I would say, but then it's a broken system. That's the UN's job, but the UN is broken. UN, United Nations, the idea of the United Nations, the idea of the Security Council, the idea behind all of this is for them to be able to mediate and to do. I mean, that's the whole idea. I mean, if you looked at it, you looked at the beginning of these ideas. If you looked at, when Ethiopia was being bombed, and many years ago, and this whole idea and these speeches done by the king of Ethiopia at that time were beautiful. But what did they do? Nothing. It's a lot of talk. So who can come in that doesn't have some kind of, it's money too. Money. Europe is still supporting the war. I think the sanctions do something. But unfortunately, they hurt also the average Russian, but they're doing something. But Putin is not a man who cares about money. It's not about money to him. He will take, doesn't care. He doesn't care if one of his oligarchs lose their boats or their money or anything. It has nothing. That's the one thing. But what he does care about is if we turn off the money from the gas and the oil. Then Western Europe, even though they have reserves, they're so afraid of doing this. That might stop it. That might actually stop the war if Europe and the world just says, look, no, we won't pay in rubles. We won't pay in dollars. We won't pay in euros. We stop all gas. All these other sanctions are great. They show a unity. They show all kinds of things, but they don't hurt where it counts. I see yes, they're having negotiations in Turkey. First, there were negotiations, which I thought were a laugh. Of course, it's better that they're at least talking. It's better that Macron is calling Putin than there is no discussion to a guy who lives in his bubble, because he's in a bubble. I think the bubble got worse with the pandemic. He became more and more isolated. He feels isolated. And yes, the Western politics and short-term thinking is partially to blame for the way we are now. And of course, Trump in 2017, but it was way before that too. And you go back to when Putin was being propped up by his supporters to Yeltsin instead of the governor of Novgorod, Nemtsov, who was a more reasonable man, who in the end, in 2005, was killed on a bridge because he was putting rallies together in 2015, putting rallies together against the war in Ukraine that was already happening. Russia started this war in Ukraine in 2014. People forget this war has been going, and tens of thousands of people have died since 2014. It's not a new war. The new war, though, is that Russia is now bombing the rest of Ukraine. That's the new war. But what did the world
Mark,
do?
before that, 2008, NATO declared Georgia and Ukraine will be a part of the NATO.
Yeah.
That's assurance triggered everything. Before 2008, Putin didn't say anything about that. So that started all this discussion. And eventually it became 2014.
Yes.
And 2014, the problem is, again, America manipulated all this Orange Revolution. They exactly did the same thing in Grenada or Nicaragua, Panama, everywhere. America tried to topple the government whom they don't like, and they bring somebody else, and they put another government, and it doesn't work.
Of course
It
it doesn't.
never worked.
Yeah.
Never. You look
And
at
the same thing
I mean,
is,
you look at Chile, Pinochet. I mean, sorry, you're right. Absolutely.
And of course, Putin has been building, his ambition was obvious. And there was a war going on since Chechnya, 2000. And I
but
think,
difference, the Chechen is a part of Soviet Union, right?
right.
It's different. Well, I don't defend Putin, but demonize one person in the war does not solve anything.
Exactly.
That question is how to stop this war. Then,
But can I ask a very direct question? If Putin dies tomorrow, do you think the war will continue?
I don't know. I don't know who is pushing this war. Maybe he's not only one person. He cannot pursue the war by himself. There are a group of people surrounding him.
There is a group of people, but as you know, in any organization, and I've experienced this myself as being a head of organizations, when I left and there was nobody running the organization falls apart. And he is the head of the snake right now, so to speak, or he's the head of this organization. Of course, Medusa, if you cut off one head, another, but who's going to come in his place? But at this point, he's the driving force and has been the driving force for this war. There has been those who have now been pushed aside, who are against it. Like any of the wars, even, the US wars or any other war. So I don't know, it's not, I think you also have to call a spade sometimes. I mean, you cannot just look at, yes, and say, okay, Putin's just a man, but he is the one leading this. You have to, and I think, and I think there's also a danger in this idea of, in war, this idea of neutrality. It's because obviously in Iraq, the second Bush, it was him and his cohorts, Cheney, Wolfowitz, all of them.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, they should have been named as war criminals. They should have been brought.
Yeah, we're paying dividend. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They should have been brought.
US
two wrongs don't make it right. I know American history has been on the wrong side so many times. Nicaragua, I mean, you just name it. I mean, and especially when there was geopolitics. I mean, you look at Africa, you look at where the Russians were putting troops, American, I mean, just Asia, everywhere. It's still happening. But two wrongs don't make a right.
Yep, that's
and this is just another wrong I see. It was wrong for America to do what it did. It was wrong for the Soviet Union to do what it did. It's wrong for the war now, what's happening in Ukraine. It's wrong what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen.
But you know,
and with American weapons.
We can't fight evil with evil. In principle, I think that's the thing. But in the real world, that's always the case. Another evil comes in and stop the evil. This time it could be NATO force, it could be US. And there is no, as Yoshi-san was saying, like there is no winner. Well, in any war, but especially this war, Putin can't win, Ukraine can't win, and there is no winner. So what's the end game? I think it's a very difficult question. I don't think anyone has answer right now. And the United Nations, we mentioned, but there is practically, I'm sure people are working for the peace and framework, but there is no clear plans in sight.
I mean, I don't know if I can agree with that statement. There's no clear plan in sight, because I think those working, both sides, on all sides are, obviously there's also agendas. The big governments have their own agendas. Yoshi, you know that more than anybody.
We'll stop when ammunition stops, when food shortage stops. So, I don't know the reality of Russian military, but there are reports from the West that they're running out of food, they're running out of gas, they're running out of morale.
Russia is a big country. There's going to be plenty of food for them. They have enough people. They lost 25 million in the Second World War. If Putin keeps pushing, he'll just like they did in the Second World War. If Russia wants to, they can just totally, which they did in Aleppo, which they did in Grozny, which they did in other, they can just annihilate. They can, this idea within war is if you can't, where we did this in Vietnam, we are destroying the city to free the city. What? I mean, that's just crazy, So what are they going to do? They're going to, like they've done in Mariupol, they've totally destroyed. There's no more city. There's no city for these people to go back. It looks
like Syria now. Yeah,
exactly. It's just like in Syria, exactly. Or Yemen. Yemen, there's the bombs flying today in Yemen. Who's talking about those poor children? Starving. But, it's not happening in one place. It's happening across the globe now. And it's also so much money involved. I mean, look at Eisenhower, who came from the military industrial complex, said, watch out for the military industrial complex. We have to, how do we, thankfully there can be regime change in certain countries through voting, but, hopefully reasonable heads prevail. In Russia, there has never been a regime change since 1999, since Yeltsin put Putin in power. There's never been a free vote there. He said he's elected by the people, but he wasn't elected by the people. So, I mean, he's the longest serving dictator of Russia at this point. We're dealing. And what about, you look at Myanmar now, Burma. I have a very dear friend who escaped Burma here in Germany, who's in his 70s. Look, the massacre is happening there right now. Students who came up, they just wanted to live their lives, and they wanted to live their life, have a better life. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, the old Buddhist idea, we all don't want to have suffering or the cause of suffering. We all want to have happiness and the cause of happiness. Normal people want to live their lives. Then there are the others who want to control those people. Now, there's a lot of debate of, Zelensky, the hero. He's not a hero, but he's fighting for his country, and I respect him for that. I don't know, there's, all kinds of things. Oh, he has connections to oligarchs. And, I've read, I'm reading both sides. I try to read both sides. I try and see both sides. But at this point, it wasn't Zelensky and the Ukrainians who attacked Russia. It's the Russians who attacked Ukraine. And yes, America was wrong when they attacked Afghanistan. America was wrong when they went into Iraq. America is wrong, I think, in supporting the Saudis in bombing Yemen with all its American bombs and American jets. But it doesn't make Russia right in what they're doing. America was wrong in 2008, or NATO made stupid statements. Biden made some really stupid statements by recently when he was in Warsaw, saying, you know, Putin should be removed.
Stay in power.
It's just, it just inflames an already inflamed situation. I mean, he's a diplomat. He should know better. I'm sorry. That's just stupid. But, you know, we as individuals can say what we think, and it's not gonna, who's gonna listen to us? You know, I don't even know how many people are listening to us on YouTube and
that's another
Clubhouse.
thing.
We don't
want to take sides of the country by country. Hey, US did this. You know, China always say, hey, you guys did the human rights violation. Does that make them right? No.
No.
So I think, you know, we're kind of putting into, hey, are you with Russia? Are you with Putin? Are you with US? Are you with NATO? Forced to think by country. I think that's what war does. But I think we have to think as an individual. You know, evil is evil, whether it's committed by Russia or US. And we know lots of people, especially these three people here, has been standing against the evil, standing against what's wrong. You know, there are distinctions between good and evil. You know, killing other people, invading other country, I think it's evil. But by having this country by country side-taking discussion, it's kind of blurred. What's wrong with this country? Hey, US did this too, or NATO did this too. There's a provocation. Does that make it right? And that, for me, that kind of blurs the discussion about what is evil and who is suffering the most. So I think we should, you know, we are, but we should even more focused on who's suffering the most and how to stop this war in many means.
So that comes back to my question: what do people do? I mean, we're talking, but what do people do?
I know.
What can an individual
how
do?
to stop the war, right?
Yeah.
Then the options we've been talking about is one is the economic sanction, which never worked, empirically proved it's never worked.
Right.
Think about the longest economic sanction, which is on Cuba. It started in 1962. It never worked. How many years? 60 years? And there are so many research on the economic sanctions. Second option is the United Nations. It never worked. It's proved. And particularly now, one of the Security Council permanent member is one party of the combat.
Yes.
So there is no point of talking about the UN at the moment. So that's why I started thinking about we had to bring in third party. And then practically there is no other country except China, which has economic power, political power, military power. But of course, there are some other elements which is against China. That's why China may be bringing totally different force, like India or Saudi Arabia, whoever, Argentina. There are chances because there are so many countries who abstained the vote for the United Nations to condemn Russian act. Those countries are not necessarily fanatic against current situations.
True.
They might be thinking about something else. So there are some opportunities among them. I don't know. These are three different options. What else we can think about?
Well, I sometimes economic sanctions do have an effect. If you look at South Africa is an example where the economic sanctions started helping change the regime. The regime, with the people within the regime, the population started hating these economic sanctions, which helped push a regime change. I mean, even if you look at, I know it's kind of silly, rugby. No, the South Africans couldn't play rugby against any other country, and South Africans love their rugby. So there was a
No,
great
but Mark,
push.
I understand that there are individual different cases. Each of them has a different conditions and the
Yes.
environment, different factors.
Yes.
Particularly for the sanction against Russia, might have far-reaching effect on other countries, let alone Russia and the ordinary people. Russian leadership, those oligarchy, won't be hurting at all.
Right.
They don't care. They don't get any hurt, but ordinary people get hurt. And then that far-reaching effect is already the United Nations, FAO, started reporting overall shortage of food everywhere in Africa, and poor country particularly.
I mentioned that earlier.
Wheat.
So that's a side effect of the economic sanctions, particularly in this case.
Well, it's not just. Unfortunately, it's a war in Ukraine because we don't know, they can't get their food out, and they also can't farm when bombs are falling on them. So it's not just the sanctions, it's a war that is causing also the food shortage. But I do think, you know, if, for example, yes, it was our stupidity, NATO stupidity, making these statements in 2008, but in 2014, we slapped Putin's hand, and if we had actually done the sanctions we do now, and we showed that there was a united effort, and we just stopped the buying of the oil, but nothing stopped. The oil kept coming. We're spending in Europe. They're spending billions on gas and oil still to Russia. This is where it hurts Russia the most. If we would have just moratorium, not forever, stop it, maybe there would be something that would happen.
Mark, you're living in Germany. Germany's gas, 40% of them come from Russia. Can you stop it?
We have reserves. There are reserves in Europe. There's reserves in Germany to last through the end of the year. So they could essentially, but is the political will of Olaf Scholz to do it, to stop it completely, just say no, and let's live on the reserves. And while they already made a deal with Qatar, they're making deals with other countries to wean themselves away from the 40% of dependency on Russian gas and oil. So there are ways to do that. If they stopped it right away, of course, oil prices would go up, gas prices go up. It doesn't mean that there's no gas. We still have plenty of gas reserves. Just the gas companies are making more money. That's all. I mean, they're putting the suffering on the people without necessarily, it's a game of money too. You know that, Yoshi. So could Europe stop? Yes, they could. Would they have reserves to last? Let's say this coming winter, we're coming into spring, we need less gas now. It's not as cold here. Yes, we could. Yes, Europe could. Is there political will? That's a different thing.
Yeah, slowly, so you could do it and you could buy time.
Yeah.
But still, you have to have a solution before the end of this year.
Yeah.
You cannot postpone everything to next year. Next year you have no gas.
At least it would show, I think, if there was that, because this money, because of course the gold is frozen, assets are frozen, banks are frozen, the state banks are frozen, they cannot get this. So the only money they're getting right now internationally, even if you're paying in rubles, you have to change the rubles with the Russian government, is the billions that are being spent every month on oil and gas, which is supporting the war. So you cut off that, that might be one solution, because then when that's cut off, then as you said, these oligarchs, what are they getting hurt by? A few of their boats were captured. Some they can't sit on their 150-foot yacht now in the Med, where they'd rather be in France eating oysters, but they're in Bodrum in Turkey. And they're going to fly to Turkey and sit on their yacht there. So, that doesn't hurt. And I said, the money, there's little money, and whether the oligarchs have money or don't have money, Putin doesn't care. But you cut off the oil, he'll care about that. Because then that just stops the machine. And the Russians I speak to, most of them are willing to suffer the consequences and agree with the sanctions. Many, because I speak to a lot of intellectuals, of course, I have also a percentage that are supporting Putin and the war and telling and giving me feedback saying he's doing the right thing. There was just Nazis running this country, and we are liberating. That's the press. They're liberating. But if you talk to Ukrainians, there's no liberation. That's not a liberation. There's nothing to do with liberation, but that's the propaganda machine. So the Russians I speak to on an intellectual side that are willing to speak to me are all, they understand, and they're willing, and they're suffering under these consequences of sanctions. And they feel that, yes, they'll suffer for it, but hopefully through it, and yes, there is a big percentage, and historically sanctions don't work. There's a small percentage historically. It helped make change. Cuba is, of course,
particularly for this case, you're talking about the Putin. Putin's mentality, you expect Putin will give up. We are pushing him to the corner, and then he might be doing something unimaginable.
Well,
we should avoid that.
He might start doing what he did in Aleppo, which is they started bombing with chemical bombs, biological weapons. And then the worst thing
with sanction, whatever, will not help anybody. Maybe it's putting a fuel on fire.
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm trying to, again, we're having a discussion of the luxury of behind our TV, our cameras. Yes, that whether it's true or not, that story of Putin and the rat. You know the story of Putin and the rat?
Putin in Iraq?
No, Putin and a rat, a rat.
Uh-huh.
You know the story?
What story?
Well, it's a story Putin talks about. That when he was a child in St. Petersburg, living in deprived Soviet Union, which he now says is the best thing in the world, he would chase and kill rats in his building and chase them around, I guess. One time, he cornered a rat and it bit him. He says, never corner a rat. Now, is Putin talking about himself?
He was talking about this?
Yes.
It's a Japanese saying.
Well, he tells a story.
Yeah, corner rat, bite back the cat.
Yeah. So the rat bit him, and he'll never forget that. So Putin is the rat now, and you're right. There's a danger. We corner Putin. What will he do in that corner?
Yeah, I think his story, well, this is just a story, but my take on that story is like Putin is telling that story that, hey, even the rat, if the rat is cornered, they will bite back. So you do not hesitate to kill that rat. Don't corner them, just kill them before it bites back. So I think that's his mentality, but now he's a rat. I agree with you. And
But
right now we're just doing escalation, sanctions, providing weapons. More. I think more escalation will happen before it de-escalate. And I don't know where the end game is. That we've been talking about this for over a few months. What's the end game for Putin? He's getting make the situation worse. I don't know if he really thought that war is over in 3 days. He can make the regime change. I don't know.
I think he miscalculated. I think he thought that
I don't
he
know
would
if
be
that's a
able.
miscalculation.
You have to remember,
Not
Putin lived in a
possible.
bubble. Putin lives
Yeah,
in a bubble
true, but
of yes
he's
men.
not crazy.
And I really think
He
that
has
he thought,
information. I don't know. He's really. I think he was prepared to fight the war for some duration to win something, but his position or Russia's position, got worse, much worse than before he invaded Ukraine. So I don't know what his end game is. That's why I think this negotiation is difficult. What do you think, Yoshi?
as Franklin
Well, that's a
Delano
dangerous
Roosevelt said,
situation now. If he sees there is nothing anymore to lose, he would do anything.
I know.
We have to avoid putting him in this situation. We have to find different, tactics.
Right.
but I have a question in that sense, Yoshi. Franklin Delano Roosevelt once said a very interesting statement. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. And if our actions are acting out of fear, is that smart too? If you make a decision from being afraid in life, if you make a decision of being afraid of doing something, is that a good decision? Now, so in your statement, in a sense, we have to be afraid of Putin. So then that means that we have a fear, and our decision is based on fear making that decision. Now, is that a good decision if we're making it from fear? I don't know. I think, historically, people in America, before entering the war in World War II, they were complacent, they were isolationists, they were afraid. Many of the other countries, when he stormed into Czechoslovakia and went into, Austria and all the rest, all the other countries said, no, well, that's all he'll want. That's all he'll want. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. What if we shouldn't provoke him. Well, And what happened? He went further and further and further. He also broke all of his agreements, even including with the Russians, right? So there is, I think, again, look at it two ways. There is on the one hand, if we act from, let's say, position of, okay, we're afraid, we shouldn't push him. And then he just keeps going. And going and going. He goes, okay, look, they're not going to do anything. I can do whatever I want anyway. And that's what I think he'll do. Or do we push and push, and maybe then there'll be a regime change from internally within his ranks. I know he built his own army, which is 600,000 people. You know this. Putin has his own army under him directly. I'm not talking about a Russian army, but his guards. He has the Putin guards of 600,000 men strong that is run by his ex-bodyguard that has no war experience, was a bodyguard. That's the head of his Russian army. So he has a lot of people that are, protecting him. But when is that going to break? I mean, if you looked at like my great uncle, many of his friends were the ones who tried to assassinate Hitler because they saw Hitler being as needing, if you cut off the head of the snake, the tail might wiggle for a while, but then it's finally going to stop. And maybe by pushing these, cutting off the oil, it'll force an internal regime change where they'll cut off their own head of their snake, because they're seeing what Putin has been doing. Yes, there was this propaganda that he built Russia back up after the 90s BS. He actually, if you've ever lived in Russia and you drive 40 kilometers outside of Moscow, you'll see a third world country where people in the middle of the winter still go take a shit in an outhouse because they don't have running water and running toilets. Babylonia had running water more than 2,000 years ago, and Russians don't. I mean, so where, I think there's a risk in either decision.
So what's your option? What's your ideal situation to stop the war?
He has a heart attack? I don't know.
You're talking about the fear, but what prevented the first nuclear war in Cuba in 1962? That's a fear. Kennedy was full of fears. And he rationally started thinking about what could prevent a nuclear war. He did a lot of mistakes. He attacked on the ground, he attacked on the sea, and both of them failed. And in the end, he has to calculate what could prevent the nuclear war because of his fear of a nuclear war. And then that's a textbook situation. He started talking to Khrushchev. Both of them, it appears both of them have the same fear. Both of them have a fear of a nuclear war. They wanted to avoid that. That's a starting point of the discussion, the negotiation.
But that's where I see a difference. Khrushchev had a fear of nuclear war. I hate to say this. I don't think Putin has a fear of anything. I don't think he cares. I really don't. He cares about what the big mistake the West has always had about Russia and Russians is they understand one thing. And this is the only thing they understand over centuries is power. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about anything but his power.
Yeah, in that case, this is the worst situation than Cuba.
This is so much worse than Cuba. This is so much worse than we've ever been anywhere near in the world. Of course, we have Kim Jong-un in Korea, who just set off another rocket and proving that his ICBM can reach America, Japan, or anywhere else. But Russia has an arsenal, a huge, massive arsenal. And you know the story of there was a mistake in the Russian chain of command where a nuclear weapon, where Russia thought it was being attacked. You know about this story, Yoshi?
No.
Russia, during the Cold War, got notice that America had sent falsely their ICBM. A Russian soldier who was told by his command to turn the key and push the button said, "No, I'm not turning the key, I'm checking first." He knew that by doing that, he was going against his commands, his orders. But by doing that, he saved the world from a nuclear war because it was a mistake in communication on the Russian side, not on the Americans. But this one man's not turning the key, because if he had turned the key and sent his rocket, guess what America would have done? They would have turned their keys and sent their rockets. But because this one man questioned it in his bunker with his ICBM, he stopped a nuclear catastrophe. So there are even those soldiers like there are those soldiers in Ukraine, Russian soldiers who I've read about, who have given up their arms and said, we cannot shoot you. There are those soldiers who might be sitting in those bunkers and say, with the nuclear weapons, we will not do this. Putin can push the button, but it still takes a chain of command to turn all the keys.
Yeah, that's from the 1962's situation. Actually, there was a decision by the captain of the ship, Russian ship, to launch nuclear weapons. But according to the procedure, 3 other people has to agree on that. And 2 of them agreed, and 1 person didn't agree. So that's how narrowly escaped launching a nuclear weapon.
But this is in the 1980s I'm talking about. So
there are
same situation.
From the beginning of a nuclear, competition, there was such a system.
Yeah, there are dozens of incidents by mistake or by miscalculation. I interviewed William Perry for a long time and made 3 documentaries about those incidents. But real danger right now is the tactical nuclear weapons, which is on standby right now, which is a smaller.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be an exchange of ICBM. It's going to be a small, tactical weapon. Could be it's designed by US first, and then Russia made this arsenal of small nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons that can be used in combat. Nuclear weapons exist so that they don't use it, but these weapons are built by US to use it in the battle, in the combat. So it's on standby in Turkey. It's on standby in Brussels from NATO, and Russia is doing the same. And that's the real danger. It's usable nuclear weapons are standby. So that's whole other spectrum of discussions people are doing, and we're past 2 hours now, so I think we should gear towards the concluding this discussion. Of course, we can continue, and we can do another issue. But I learned a great deal about these existential questions that everybody put into, and but on media. If you're looking at US news, I have to watch it like 12 hours a day. It's like a game, Who are you on our side or not?
Are you chasing the hearing in the Senate? And
yes,
that's ridiculous.
Well, those Congress members are crazy. Some members are just willing to. It's a propaganda.
It's scary.
Yeah. Unbelievable. But that only escalates, and that's create more wartime mentality, deepening, and it's escalating. Putting more.
What is most scary is I don't think that it's not even propaganda. Maybe there are some people who are intentionally trying to do some propaganda. Most of them don't realize what they're talking about. In the name of anti-war, they escalate war.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a ridiculous situation at the moment.
Exactly.
It's well, you have to also remember a lot of these members of Congress, some of them have not traveled, some of them have not been in war zones, some of them, or maybe are very well educated, but there's a world education and understanding of various things outside of your own bubble of, America, for example, or let's say even if you look at Japanese politicians, same thing, or if you look at anywhere in any country in the world. And then they, I think people get emotional and say things, from their gut. Like Biden, it was a mistake, but I think it was just an off the cuff statement, which he's known for doing for a long time. He's done it so many times, and it's something he would have said in private, but unfortunately he said it publicly, which he should know better by now at his age, being a politician.
Yeah.
And these politicians,
practically lost all his cards by saying all stupid things.
Yes.
If we coming to the process of truth or ceasefire, he has no place to be because he is one of the gangs. He behaves like one of the gangs.
Yep.
He lost his own cards. That's unfortunate. World most powerful country's president. He should have thought much better.
Yeah, we're in a very dire situation, and I think as a closing comment, I come back to the very first statement you made, Yoshi, and which comes back to what you also said, Taku, about Kenji did, about the weakest people, about the normal people, about those who are suffering on all sides of a war, and those who are suffering from the wider, this war is like dropping a stone in a pond, and the ripples go out and out and out. And this ripple effect of this war has global effects. And of course, even if they right now, I'm out 8 hours away. If they drop a nuclear weapon, my radiation detector, which I was using in Fukushima to help those in Japan after the natural disaster, will probably start ringing, but it's already up pretty high. And it's also, there is what's very scary for me, because I'm can be in a wind pattern from Chernobyl or any of the other nuclear plants that have been under fire. Now, they haven't hit one directly, but they've hit the infrastructures around some of the nuclear plants to take control of them. So that is also another fear, is there's, Ukraine has these the largest nuclear plants in Europe. And if one of those goes, we can have another Chernobyl. And that could have resounding effects with wind and everything else, like it had, like the same thing that happened in Japan. I mean, huge swaths and areas, and people in France are still suffering from cancers from Chernobyl. So tactical weapons are not tactical ever.
Exactly.
I think it's a fallacy to say this is a tactical nuclear weapon, because there is no tactical nuclear weapon, because the fallout from a nuclear weapon, even if it's tactical, goes up in the air and it affects masses of people around the world, because it can go up into the atmosphere and then it can land. It may travel up in the stratosphere and come back down in some other location, and there's no way to know that and no way to prove that well, now we probably can with weather patterns and everything else. So to me, there is no tactical nuclear weapon. There should be no nukes. We shouldn't have nuclear weapons. We should be a nuclear-free world. We should be a world free of war, but we're human beings, and human beings are full of anger and hatred and power and lust and jealousy, and that hasn't changed. Unfortunately, none of these leaders are enlightened. If they would be, we wouldn't be in this situation. Unfortunately, we are with leaders around the world who care about their own power more than about their people. I don't care who you're talking about, whether you're talking about American leaders, or you're talking about Russian leaders, or leaders in China or Germany or anywhere else. It's about collecting the power to be in control. And who suffers? The average person. And the humanity is who's suffering. And sentient beings, the dogs, the animals in the forests, every one of these sentient beings in a war zone get affected, not just humans.
Yeah.
We destroy environments, we destroy places, and it's sad. But I'm still will stand the best I can to support the Ukrainian refugees and Russians. And I've said this in Facebook. My heart goes out to the Russians. I am helping. I will help Russians just as much as Ukrainians who are trying to flee from this atrocity. And it's it's the horror of this war. And if I was on the ground in Ukraine and my family was being attacked, going back to that question, would I defend myself? Probably yes. And I would be just as evil as probably the others. And it's a sad thing to say, but you know, if you're under that situation, and I hope I never am, my own family, when Russia, during the Civil War, they fought against the Bolsheviks. Were they evil for that? I don't know. They believed that the Bolsheviks were destroying their country. They lost, and then they were refugees. So it's back to the humanitarian thing. We need to help the little people wherever we can, do what we can to stop the war in our little ways. Every person counts, though. Every person counts. If we all fight against any criminal act, any war. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yoshi?
Yeah, your son. Any closing thoughts?
Mark, I think you should show your movie here.
Right.
Your emotional power is being put in that movie. I can see that now very well. You don't talk about the movie?
Well, I mean, if anybody wants to see, I'm re-editing my movie at this point. Some parts of it I need to cut out because there's a person in my film who is in big support of Putin, and it's very hard for me to stomach the fact that he is propagating propaganda that is totally false on YouTube with his fake documentaries. So Nikita Mikhalkov, and very upsetting. But my movie is about my great uncle, Andrei Tchelistcheff, he's one of the ones who I'm speaking about, who fought in the Civil War as a teenager and then became one of the greatest winemakers in the world and changed the world of wine. And the movie is andreithevoiceofwine.com. So if I can ridiculously promote my film in this situation where actually we were talking about how we've helped refugees, wonderful. But see the movie, it's actually a very touching story about a man who gave his life to something which he loved, which was wine, and he never did it for the money, he did it from his passion. And that's one of the beautiful stories about this movie. I think if we come from a point of, and he was a very tolerant man and compassionate man and a true gentleman. And I think if, we've gotten in music, in video games, in so many things, we have moved towards such violence. I mean, in the lyrics I hear in music, it's violent. The video games are violent. The movies are violent. Yes, they're a reflection of a certain aspect of society, but I think what we need is a little bit more love in this world. And recently, my 7-year-old's kindergarten teacher did a song with the children. I don't know, hear it better here?
Yeah. Yep. Nice. That's all they need. A little bit of love.
So my daughter's voice was in there, and I think that's very appropriate.
Yep.
Because if we loved each other more and cared about each other more, there'd be less violence, there'd be less abuse, there'd be less everything. And the other thing is, speaking of children, this war also opens then the unfortunate, huge, with a big can opener, the criminality that is happening on the border right now, which our women and children are being taken and put into slavery, and so many young girls are being forced into prostitution and human trafficking, and there are so many other consequences and so much suffering. So however we can stop this war, it should be stopped. That's all I can say. And my love goes to all those people suffering everywhere in the world, not just Ukraine, but in Afghanistan and Yemen, in Japan and America, in Germany, in France, in every place, in every corner of the world, in Thailand, in Indonesia, people are suffering, in Australia, every little corner. And may as in there's a very beautiful Buddhist prayer that was done by the Buddha, apparently, because it was all said afterwards and written down after he died. But in Rajgir Peak, he said, "May all beings not have suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all beings live in the middle, beyond the great extremes, between suffering and anger and all of the rest. So may the world have less suffering, and may it have more love, and love."
Thank you, Mark. Any closing thoughts?
Not really.
Sorry, Yoshi.
Well, the one thing is clear. To stop this war, everyone has to share the part of the unsatisfaction. There is no total satisfaction at all anywhere. That's war. Taku.
Well, there is no winner in war, any war, but especially this war. And chain reaction, unfortunately, has started. Chain reaction of war against war, weapon against weapon. This taking sides mentality is already started. I think it's gonna go on for some time, but there's always end of the war. So I have to hope we don't have any clear solution on the table yet, but the war has to stop. And chain reaction of hate is always create next war. That's what I'm worried about already. Russians are discriminated against, and they will have animosity against the West. More people maybe turned against West. I don't know. So one thing I remember, my friend, I have a clubhouse with Keiko-san and Kazu-san. Kazu Kurimoto, our friend, has a friend in Ukraine, and she wrote to him that she's a refugee now. She escaped from bombing. She's in danger of her own life. But she said to Kaz is that I'm worried about my Russian friends. There is so much hate against Russians, and Russians may be hating Ukraine now. But she is in danger of life, her own life, but she's worried about her friends in Russia because of this chain reaction of hate. So, something to remember, the people always suffer, and listen to the people who suffers. I think it's the most important thing, no matter what the politics, no matter what the difficult situations are. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Yoshi-san, for deep conversation. I learned a great deal, and I had my thoughts have deepened today, and we should continue this conversation soon.
Did you see the chat? Somebody wrote on
Oh.
saying incentive to all stop the war is the only way, whatever that can be to each party.
That's right.
So I agree with that. I mean, however we can do that, and then help in every little way to those who are suffering. I don't care where they're from.
Yeah, everybody can take part. Not taking sides of the war or evil, fighting evil with evil, but with goodness. I think that's something at least we can do to help, especially refugees, people who are suffering. Each one of us have a role in it. So thank you so much for your words and thoughts and passion and everything. And we should, hopefully we can see each other in person and have more discussion with wine. Yeah?
Absolutely. I guess we don't open it up to questions then. No,
I don't think so.
I think it's long enough, huh?
It's too long. Okay. Well, thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Mark. Talk.
Take care. Love
Take
you
care.
both. Love you both. Take care.